Hello again, my dear subscribers and fellow hawks. Welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the debate and just generally going over the third Democratic debate that happened a couple days ago. I have been quite busy, and so I'm just getting to the debate now. I'm going to have a few videos going up on particular moments in the debate that really stood out to me. There are a few. A lot of them are really quite cringy moments from some of the prominent Democrats about, foreign policy, my main area of interest. And so the overall tone of the debate, it was somewhat bland in general. I mean, it was the first one that was not divided into two nights. We had one night, top 10 candidates. We had, Amy Klobuchar and Julian Castro in particular. They were two candidates that were basically at the bottom in terms of the polling. And Castro, of course, made, a very, outlandish sort of attempt at garnering support. Tried to, go very much head to head against Joe Biden and try to win over some of the progressive vote. Now, what's interesting about this is that that's a hard thing to do, right? Because you have Joe Biden, which is more or less the prominent de facto moderate to blue dog Democrat candidate, right? There's not that much competition on his side of things. But on the progressive side, well, I should clarify. I mean, Amy Klobuchar would fall in the spectrum more towards Joe Biden. I like Amy Klobuchar for the most part. She really talks at length about upholding and reaffirming the commitment to NATO and the values which NATO holds dear, which, well, you could argue are largely platitudes in an era of cringe in which isolationist talking points, non-interventionist talking points from, losers like the L-taker-in-chief Donald Trump and Kremlin shill Jill Stein and, crazy Bernie, nutso Liz, the far right, the far left, tanky Tulsi Gabbard, of course. When in an era in which we are overwhelmed by isolationist voices, even platitudes, even simple formalities that ultimately bid a tone of reverence towards the institutions of the liberal order, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the European Union, the idea of the West as a whole, the idea of the responsibility to protect, and so on. These ideas, even if they are championed by way of platitudes from someone such as Amy Klobuchar, that is still remarkable, and that still takes courage in this era. Because it's very easy to try to get votes by talking crap about NATO and talking about how it's actually the U.S. that's the problem in the world. That's easy. There's nothing brave about that. Everybody, the far left, the far right, a lot of the nutters on the center left, the center right, all the paleo idiots on the right, the progressives on the left, they're all going to side with you. We saw this with Tanky Tulsi Gabbard. Even though she's a nobody and she's pulling at 1%, she was able to get a vast amount of hype from the right wing. Because what did she say? She said that she would protect and uphold and defend their daddy, Bashar the Butcher. And so she was able to get support from the left and the right. Because there are people on both sides that are fringe and cringe and hate Jews and love dictators, tin pot despots, and see Bashar the Butcher as someone who protects Christian minorities, someone who champions patriarchy, someone who fights degeneracy and liberalism as they see it. And so Tanky Tulsi was able to accrue quite a bit of support from the Republican side. And I mentioned this with the Hawks the other day. I believe it was the podcast or the live stream that we did with Jay the War Keto, that, you know, Tanky Tulsi Gabbard, even though she's a one percenter, and she's always going to be a one percenter, and that's so lovely. I love that. But, you know, my guess is she's probably polling at like 8% support with Republicans. I haven't seen any polls. I don't think any of them have been conducted. But I mean, if Tanky Tulsi Gabbard were to primary Trump on the Republican side, would like 8%, 10% of Republicans vote for her? I mean, that's not being floated as an idea. She's running on the Democratic side. But she has all the praises of Tucker Carlson, you know, Tanky Tucky. Tanky Tucky praises Tanky Tulsi. Those two, they have this synergy of the praise and admiration and reverence and paeans for the great leaders of the tin pot despotisms, from North Korea to fascist Russia to the Syrian debacle. I mean, there isn't an issue, you name it, economics, social values, and of course foreign policy. There is not a single metric by which you could pinpoint someone and their politics on which Tanky Tulsi and Tanky Tucky Carlson are not on the wrong. I mean, it's a joke, right? And yes, the outtaker-in-chief Donald Trump desires and seeks and craves the praise of Tucker Carlson. We know this, of course. We know this to be true, and it's sad that he listens to Tucker Carlson more than any of his official advisors. Tucker Carlson does not act in any official capacity, but he has more influence, arguably, than Sean Hannity, arguably than any of the staff on hand at the White House, and he's an isolationist cringe monger. I mean, that's about as disastrous a situation as it can get. We saw this with the Islamic Republic of Iran. What did they do? They shot down a U.S. military asset, a drone, worth about $130 million, shot it down brazenly, and the Donald Trump administration, in my speculation on the council of John Bolton the Based, was about 10 minutes from actually going ahead and doing a retaliatory strike against the Islamic Republic. But what happened? All of a sudden, Trump changed his mind and said, you know, I'm going to be courageous here and actually not retaliate and actually let Iran get away with it and cuck us on the world stage. Why did he do that? Well, it's easy to say, you know, he's acting on behalf of Russian interests, and Iran is a Russian ally, so of course he's not going to attack them. But that's a bit simplistic. I think a more in-depth analysis would say, well, you know, the rhetoric of someone such as, and it's not even the rhetoric per se, it's the direct counsel at this point through Fox News from Tucker Carlson. He speaks to the president. The president watches his program all the time. That Tanky Tucky got to him and said, you know, don't do it. Be an isocock. Be an isocock. Take an L. Just do it. Because, you know, we love the strong leaders over in Iran, and we wish that we could be like them. And we wish that we could go back to our brand of Christianity being the same as the, you know, backwater, dark ages brand of Islam that these guys have over there. You know, they love it. They don't like that, you know, they don't like that the people over there are brown, and they probably don't really see Islam as the correct or true religion. But, you know, they love the Muslims. They can get away, that the Islamic theocrats over there, they can get away with all the rape and all the patriarchal despotism. They love it. And Tucker Carlson, you know, he loves that. I mean, because he's a socialist authoritarian at heart. And, you know, talk about this with respect to the debate that he had with Ben Shapiro. There isn't a capitalist bone in Tucker Carlson's body. There isn't a hawk bone in his body. Ben Shapiro, and I'll talk about this in later videos. He's not really a neocon. He's not somebody who's a liberal hawk. He's hawkish with respect to issues that concern Israel's national security. Well, he's a welcome ally in that respect. Because yes, sure, he might not be a hawk on other areas like North Korea that don't pose a direct threat to Israel. But on the issues that do concern Israel, he's on the right side. So I welcome that. I welcome Ben Shapiro as an ally in arms in this respect, and it's a good thing that he has a big audience. And, he owned Tucker Carlson, but Tucker Carlson, he's basically Cenk Uygur, just Republican Cenk Uygur at this point. What does he do? He counsels Trump. And what did we see at the debate? We see the exact same talking points that Donald Trump would have given. The exact same talking points. It is pathetic. Elizabeth Warren on that debate stage basically sounded like the Eltaker-in-Chief Donald Trump. There was no differentiating factor. The only differentiating factor that we saw at this debate that, this is supposed to be an election that's a referendum on the president. So you would expect, in all issues, in all aspects of policy, we'll see the candidates, one, to try to differentiate themselves from each other, and two, try to differentiate themselves from the president. Well, they did that on immigration. They argue, Donald Trump, he's a racist or whatever on immigration. He's killing kids at the border. He's taking kids away from their families. And, if you vote for us, we'll open the borders up. That's basically their argument, right? That they're trying to brand themselves as the polar opposite to Trump on immigration. And in that respect, they're largely successful. The progressives are. That's something that they're able to successfully draw a contrast where, yeah, there are two camps in that regard. But they didn't continue that with foreign policy. They didn't continue that at all. On foreign policy, they made no effort to differentiate themselves from the president. They actually, the only effort that I saw to differentiate themselves from Trump was to try to go even more isolationist than him, to try to brand him as this unstable hawk, which is comical because there isn't, as I said, there's not a hawk bone in the Eltaker-in-Chief's body. There's not. All he has is isolationist pigeon. And sure, you could say, well, he sent off something like 50 Tomahawk missiles after Assad gassed 1,000 civilians, and he targeted the Shayrat Air Base in Syria. Oh, he hit a few bunkers that it appeared that they moved the MiGs out of anyway, in some random air base in Syria that isn't even very prominent, not very much a key military asset to the Assad regime by any measure. Oh, what a hawk. What an evil, no good neocon, am I right? That's basically how the Democrats tried to frame the foreign policy spectrum, because they agree with Trump when it comes to interventionism. They both agree. Interventionism bad, Russia good, That's their perspective. Now, of course, Joe Biden, he's a little bit different on this. I'll get into this in a different video. But Joe Biden, I mean, wow, what a shameful, absolute shameful state of affairs where Joe Biden has to be ashamed and apologize and try to hide away from his record of supporting the war, the campaign to liberate the Iraqi people from the tyranny, the Republic of Terror of Saddam Hussein. Oh, he must be so ashamed that he got rid of a dictator, helped get rid of a dictator that killed, 1.5 million Iraqis and ran the country as his own personal, gulag, his own personal plantation for 30 years, and he would have continued to do so for decades more if America hadn't stepped in. Oh, he must be so ashamed of himself. It was an embarrassment. The fact that instead of getting points for achieving victory and toppling a brutal tyrant, instead, what do you get? You get no thanks whatsoever. You get everybody calling you an evil, no good USA imperialist. And Joe Biden had to shy away from it. And it's unfortunate. I like Joe Biden. I've got a lot of issues, I think, on style and whatnot. There's definitely some issues with Joe Biden. From the candidates available, it's him and Klobuchar in my view. Those are the only two that I would seriously support. Um, you know, Andrew Yang, he's interesting. I think some of his economic platforms are going to be relevant, probably be prominent policy discussions in the House in the 2030s. I think, as I've said before, Yang has 2030 solutions for 2010 problems, 2010s problems. Well, in contrast, Crazy Bernie, he has 1950 solutions for 2010s problems. Neither of them are going to get elected with that. And if they did, neither of those solutions would really work to solve the issues at hand currently. And so, with this debate, what do we see? We see that it is indicative of the era of cringe, because at the end of the day, instead of having a very interesting and engaging discussion about, how are we going to, as, in their case, as America, but in general, as the Western Alliance, how are we going to promote democracy? How are we going to alleviate suffering in the world? How are we going to uphold our national security interests, deter and retaliate against our enemies who are attacked, and ultimately persevere to ultimately yield another American century? How are we going to do that? That was not up for discussion at this debate. What was up for discussion was who's going to withdraw the most troops from Afghanistan? Who's going to give the Taliban the most territory, the most women to rape and torture and oppress? Who's going to surrender and condemn the most peoples in the world to tyranny and tin pot despots? Who's going to get the most political points for surrendering the national dignity to terrorists and dictators? That was what was up for debate, and it was pathetic. And unfortunately, if this were any other era, we would look at this and say, well, sure, the Democrats, they are full of cringe, and this is a losing direction. And when the Republicans have their primary debates, what are we going to see? We're going to see them, have the opposite view. We're going to see them give a different alternative for the American people to choose from. We're going to see them talk tough on terror. We're going to see them talk tough on despots. We're going to see them uphold national security and champion the ideas of liberty and democracy in the world. But no, one, we're not really having Republican debates. And two, even if we were, who would dominate the scene? It would be the L-taker-in-chief, Donald Trump, talking about how little fat Kimmy is his favorite dictator, and how he's such a strong leader, and how the communist system of North Korea is so harmonious, and all the people, when the dear leader stands, they listen and obey, and how, we should learn from them, and we should learn to be obedient as the North Koreans, and we should have a president for life, like the communists over in communist China, and how isn't Vladimir Putin, isn't KGB Vlad such a strong and brilliant leader, such a genius, such a true hero of the peoples? That's what's up for debate. So we have an isolationist circle jerk on the Democratic side, and we have an isolationist solo jerk on the Republican side. Again, my friends, era of cringe. I repeat that every time these days because it is so true. Era of cringe, era of cringe, era of cringe. Fringe and cringe on both sides. Pathetic. And the only semblance of a counter, the only semblance of a voice of reason is Amy Klobuchar, who is polling at about 1% currently, and only offers, mild platitudes in support of NATO. Again, admirable in this era, considering the context. And Joe Biden, the front runner on the Democratic side, but in his case, has to be ashamed and look down at the ground and shy away from his record of toppling tyrants and upholding American security. Unbelievable. Joe Biden, I have issues with him. I disagree with him on some things. Some of the style I disagree with, but he's a pretty professional guy. He's somebody who takes his job seriously and his duty to the country seriously. And he's somebody that I see as having genuine convictions and having the sense to seek expert counsel where he knows that he doesn't necessarily have the most knowledge at hand, and that if he were president, I trust that he would seek the advice of generals and experts in matters of foreign policy to advise him, and that he would take their expertise and their hard earned knowledge to heart in deliberating his actions in the best interest of the country, even if we might come to different conclusions about what would be best. Joe Biden is an honest actor. And for that, he gets no political credit. He's seen as an establishment shill. He's seen as somebody who voted for an evil, no good imperialist war for the oils. Pathetic. Unbelievable. The fact that this is the state of the political discourse, this is the worst state of political discourse in America since the 1930s, in all seriousness. I'm not even kidding right now. Since the isolationists, the America Firsters, the Hitler's our friend, let's trade with Hitler, those isolationists. This is the worst. It's never been that bad. The sheer amount of dictator apologia, it has not been this bad since the run-up to World War II. After the defeat of fascism, after the invigorated effort to combat fascism in the Pacific and European theaters and achieve victory, America oversaw a 70-year project of establishing the liberal order in the world, freeing and giving more prosperity to more people than at any point in the history of humanity. And now it's all crumbling down because the Soviet Union is defeated, so we can sit on our butts and twiddle our thumbs and not try anymore. Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. And the fact that these isolationist talking points are seen as the default on both the right and the left, as you have to agree with this, you would be an insane lunatic warmonger or whatever if you had any disagreement with this. Joe Biden must be so ashamed for liberating 30 million Iraqis from the man who literally used chemical weapons. I mean, we're having a debate about whether or not he had WMDs. It's not a matter of did he have them or not. That's not even really the issue at hand here. Yeah, you're not allowed to build up a bunch of chemical weapons if you're a rogue state like him. Yeah, that's a problem, but that's not, I don't care if he had some chemical weapons in 2003 or if he didn't. That's not the issue. The issue is he used them. You should look up the 10,000 or so Kurds that were murdered. They were gassed simply for being Kurdish by Saddam Hussein. Chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction. So, of course he had them. And you could say, oh, well, he dismantled the primary firing mechanisms and he only had the precursors. We couldn't find that he had some WMDs anymore. Oh, that is so pathetic, and I will have a video up on this. It is just such a bunk talking point. It is such a bunk meme, because it is tantamount to saying that if I went out on the street and I murdered, let's say 10,000 people, I had a bunch of guns and I killed 10,000 people, just loaded up, just absolutely unloaded on, a bunch of civilians, just killed 10,000 people, and then I went home, and then the cops catch up with me later, and they come to my place. And they say, we have a warrant issued for your arrest. You killed all these people. You're going to jail, dude. And they come in and they search my place and they don't find any weapons. Am I free to go? Like, would I be free to go in that circumstance? I could say to them, you found nothing. You got nothing on me. You got nothing on me. That's basically the argument that these isolationists are making, and of course the answer is no. That there is no statute of limitations on murder. If you murder somebody today, and cops catch up with you in 23 years, guess what? You're going to jail. Why? Because there's no statute of limitations on murder. Likewise, no statute of limitations on genocide. If America went in 1993, they would have been just as justified to do so as they went in 2003, and they would have been just as justified to do so if they toppled Saddam in 2023. or 2033. Why? Because he would always have been guilty for gassing 10,000 Kurds. And even if he dismantled the weapons right after he did so, again, that's like me dumping the guns in the river if I were to do that. Is that going to absolve me of guilt in the eyes of the law? Does that make me no longer morally culpable in the deaths of 10,000 people that I just killed? No. Why? Because it doesn't matter if you keep the guns in your pocket or you store them on your premises. What matters is the guilty act in the first place. What matters is the genocide in the first place. Joe Biden for supporting the war in Iraq, sure, he's shying away from it now because we live in the era of cringe and he wants to prevail, and so he can't make a ruckus. He cannot speak his mind. I understand this. I get it. It's pathetic, but it's not really, it's savvy on Joe Biden's part. It doesn't reflect as pathetic on him. It reflects as pathetic on the political culture that he has to do so. He should be embracing and running on these great accomplishments of, championing democracy in the world. Unfortunately, he gets no points for that. It is pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. This debate was disappointing. A lot of the framing was very much off. Some of the things that the candidate said were unbelievably insane. I'm going to have a video on this, but not so Elizabeth Warren, what did she say? She said that America should have a foreign policy which reflects the ultimate leadership and upholding America's values and leading according to our values. This is what Elizabeth Warren said. And she went on immediately to proceed to argue for a complete withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. And it was not followed up by any fact-checking, any common sense, any logic by the moderators. I can tell you, because if I were moderating the debate and she just said that in front of me, I would say, with all due respect, Nutso Liz, you are aware that American values are actually antithetical to the Taliban, and that condemning 15 million Afghan women to becoming the personal property and chattel of the Taliban is actually anathema to liberal values, American values, feminism, and all the things that you claim to believe in. So could you just restate that for the record? Are you saying that, leading by our values, we should give 15 million people over to the Taliban or not? She wasn't challenged on it. She wasn't challenged on it because we live in the era of cringe. We absolutely live in the era of cringe. And one day, if this channel gets big and I'm invited to host a debate at some point, you can damn well guarantee that if anybody tries to pull an isolationist fast one on me, nah, I ain't getting by, because I take W's. These moderators, they took a lot of L's. And what's unfortunate is that the world's going to take some L's if this stands. It cannot stand. Joe Biden is the hope at this moment. He is the most hawkish candidate, and that is unfortunate because he's not that much of a hawk. He's very much not that much of a hawk at all, and it is unfortunate. 100%. Very unfortunate. So thank you for watching, YouTube.